welcome to our webinar this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to be looking at the topic of hyperautomation in the content supply chain and how we can use that to maximize business efficiency. And Tony Taylor is going to be the host today. He is the CEO of TransMedia Dynamics. He's got over 30 years of experience in the broadcast and media sectors. So he has a lot of experience and expertise. Dan Hill is TMD's solutions architect. He's been working with Mediaflex for many years, and he has a wealth of knowledge on the technical side that he will bring to this webinar this afternoon. And we have Olly Henshell, who is the technical project manager for TMD. He's been working with one of our biggest clients, and he has now joined TMD. So from a client perspective, he has a lot of knowledge and experience. And then we're very happy to have Martin Jefferson with us today as a guest panelist. He's from WildBrain and the Director of Media Operations Technology. So he will be able to talk about Mediaflex as an end user and why WildBrain looked at Mediaflex as the solution, and go into some detail on that. So Tony, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Joe. Welcome everybody to this webinar on a lovely sunny afternoon in the UK. I'll try not to bore you too much with things, and hopefully you'll get quite a bit of information from it. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to look at the journey of automation and orchestration and how organizations can maximize their efficiency across the content supply chain by using things like hyperautomation, which we'll go into the definition of as we go through this. So what is automation, first off? Well, I think automation has been in the broadcast industry for many years. It started off as play-out automation, and then we've started to get automation through the workflows, through the content supply chain. So it's taking single tasks and functions that humans have done in the past and creating a process that allows you to implement that in a software system that takes the human element out of that repetitive process. A lot of people have been concerned about automation and AI, etc., but it's really about utilizing that that software, that technology for repetitive human processes that we really couldn't do what we do today with the amount of content that's out there for on demand, etc., without using automation of some sort. Orchestration is really about joining those tasks together, making sure that the workflows are orchestrated, making sure that the decisions through those workflows are made in an automated way, using AI and machine learning in some places, using content intelligence, so the information that might be held within the files itself, and orchestrating those workflows as they flow through the content supply chain. So in terms of the content supply chain, what are we looking at? Well, we look at the media management with 4 pillars, and we've looked at this over the years. When we started out in 1998, we saw that there were 3 core components to every media organization. Content, but that's not just the audio or video, it's all of the ancillary content and the metadata that goes around it. So you've got a huge plethora of video, audio, subtitles, graphics, etc., and that content has to be identified through metadata of some form. But nothing happens to that content unless you put it through a workflow of some form, whether it be very simple or very complex. So intrinsically linking that content to the workflow gives you a very big step up in the way that you can manage your content. But nothing happens to that workflow unless you use a resource of some form, whether that be a human resource or technical resource or both. So those three core concepts within the content supply chain and every media organization in it are the foundation of what you're doing. But out of those three comes a fourth, which is the analytics, understanding what you're doing, what is going on, how are you going to do it, the trends, and all the metrics is what enables you to drive your business in a better manner. So those four components are what we call the 4 pillars of media management. The reason they're needed is really it's about the challenges today in the content and media supply chains. And we've seen that the consumption of media content on more devices, on more platforms, is increasing at a rate that if it was done manually, we could not create all that content ready for consumption by the consumers. And of course, with all of that content comes a need to discover it. So if it's in systems, if it's in platforms around your operation or in third-party operations, you've got to be able to find it. So the metadata has to be tracked and managed through that. You need to improve the operational efficiency. We've seen costs rising, and people are trying to make sure that they have those operational efficiencies in place. And to that, you've got to create workflow orchestration. You've got to understand what processes you have. You've got to be able to orchestrate them. You've got to be able to join them up and make the systems aware of all of that content as it flows through the platform. Using AI and machine learning is one area that we've used, and we'll see how that's done within Mediaflex as it flows through and how you create that workflow orchestration using that metadata. As I said before, the analytics are a key part of what is needed in the supply chain today. Of course, security, we've seen a lot of talk about security, especially over the last month or so, and securing that content, monetizing it, making sure it's available, because if you don't know what you've got, then it's not an asset, it's a liability. And then creating that agile business model to ensure that you can keep up with the amount of consumption that we're seeing out there in the marketplace. To do that, we're seeing implementation of content management solutions across the content supply chain, whether that be called MAM, DAM, content management systems. They've all got those different names, but essentially it's trying to manage that content as it flows through and is acquired and delivered out the other end. So one of the areas that we've looked at over the years, and an area that Gartner identified as a key enabler for businesses going forward, is something called hyperautomation. All sounds very technical and space-like, but essentially all hyperautomation is utilizing the metadata that is either in systems, in the files themselves, to make those decisions and be integrated into the orchestration engine. So what you see here in the graphic is a real-world workflow. This has automated decision making in it. The first task block is an automated decision, and that decision is based on certain parameters that can be dynamic as it flows through the workflow. So if we look into a bit more detail, what we see here is this is really filtering on a very simple piece of metadata, which is a file name. It could be much more complex. It can be file size. It can be information such as the resolution of the content. For example, one of our clients, before they put the Mediaflex system in place, they were having to look at every piece of content that came in from a distributor, because they didn't know what the distributor was particularly sending them, to find out whether it was SD, HD, or something else. And now with the automated decision making, they can let all that content come in, and it automatically flows through to the correct workflow that it needs to go to. So it's about utilizing that metadata to make those decisions. And as I've said, that metadata can be dynamic as it goes through the system. So changes in the metadata and the statuses of the content can drive workflows further on downstream that change in a dynamic way. All of this within the Mediaflex platform is done through a graphical user interface. As you can see here, it is graphical, it's very easy, it's a no-code environment, so you're not looking at expensive development resources, and it can be done very quickly. And we'll hear a bit later on from Olly, who has been using Mediaflex from a client perspective, just how that has helped the client that he worked for, he's now working for TMD, within the workflow operations. So from that, we look at the journey of that content through the content supply chain. And this graphic here provides an idea of how Mediaflex is able to manage your content right throughout the processes. Mediaflex is quite unique in that it manages both physical and digital content. So we have clients that have a significant volume of physical content in their archives, and there are clients that have no physical content in their archives. One example of that is WildBrain, who will be Martin will be talking shortly about their experience with Mediaflex. Theirs is a pure digital platform, whereas others have both digital and physical. And we see the ability to drive those workflows and drive the metadata, the workflows through the metadata as it flows through the whole content supply chain. So what we see here, as I say, is the all forms of the content. It's physical, it's digital. It comes in at one end and it goes out at the other end, but is also stored in the center. Now, one of the differences with the content supply chain within the media business to other supply chains, you might turn around and think that they're the same. Take the automotive industry, you get a design of a car, it's built and it's sold. So all of those parts come in, create the vehicle and send it out. The difference between the content supply chain in the media business is that the processes around the content are iterative. So there are many creative iterations of this content as it flows through. And that increases the need to utilize that hyperautomation, that metadata to drive those processes. So when we look at physical's fairly straightforward. We have collections for audiovisual archives, library management. It's pretty much manual throughout those processes. So there are very few areas where hyperautomation can benefit. Workflow does, because clearly people are moving from job to job. But in the physical environment, we don't see that much in the way of that automated processing. It's when it gets into the digital domain that we start to see that. So we have, as I said earlier, the iterative processes, the creative side of things. We all know that we have a lot of review and approvals processes that go on where people are going backwards and forwards on edits, those sorts of things, whether it's enrichment, adding audio languages, adding subtitle languages to content as it goes through. And of course, if that is those subtitles and audio files are outsourced to third-party operations, which they often are, then that's going to be going backwards and forwards quite a bit. So it's making sure that those workflows allow you to have that metadata management and the what we see as a hyperautomation to manage those in an effective way. It may take longer to bring in say a German language than it would a French language, etc. So you have to look at that from those iterative processes. So you've got then QC processes, manual and automated, or as we call it, assisted QC, and then publish into a plethora of devices. So it used to be that on scheduled television channels, on linear channels, if you created an hour's worth of content, that was sent out to maybe 5-6 million people. So it was fairly straightforward on a linear channel. With today's content, we're talking about delivering that hour of content to those people, but it may be that each of those consumers may be looking for a different hour. So it could be that you're looking at 5,000, 10,000, 5 million hours worth of content for the same type of environment when you're looking at video on demand. So it's the ramp up in content that is driving the need for this hyper automation and workflow automation. Just a look at how Mediaflex has helped one client. This is one of our larger clients with automated tasks, and this is the amount of automated tasks that it ran within 2021. So we talk about reporting and metrics, and we can see here that they've been archiving a lot of content, doing a lot of QC. But one of the biggest areas that you can see on this slide here is the amount of automated workflow decision making that's gone on. Over 12 million automated decisions. So if you consider that is using metadata, it's using hyper automation to drive those workflows and drive the efficiency in the business. That's what's needed today to move things forward, and that's how Mediaflex is able to help these clients through their business efficiency. So transcodes, audio processing, as we've talked about, data moves, etc. So that's quite a big view on how those workflow decisions manifest themselves. What I'm going to do now is, this is WildBrain's 2021 figures, and as you can see, it's not as big as the other client. But what I want to do now is to hand over to Martin, really, to talk about how they've used Mediaflex in their operation and where they came to look at Mediaflex and utilize it across the operation. So Martin, if I hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tony. Just a very brief potted history of the company. About 10 years ago, we were very small, and about 10 years ago, we acquired a very, very large library and were basically handed a NAS with 600 terabytes of content on it and said, here you go, and no documentation on it, nothing. And basically, I'm sure a lot of people, at that time were in a similar situation where if you wanted to know if you had something, you had to go drill through multiple layers of subfolders in Windows. So we very quickly realized that we needed a system to help us, and we started on a discovery process that took a number of years, and we actually took a wrong turn and eventually realized that we'd taken a wrong turn, and we opened up our search to other companies, and Mediaflex, or TMD, was the company that we decided to go with, primarily because of all this automation and because we're able to design our own workflows without having to pay huge fees and what have you. We really have complete control over our workflow construction process. And you know, you can see the number of titles that has actually now grown. We're actually in the process this very week of rolling this Mediaflex out to our UK operation, which manages our YouTube presence and also manages a number of third-party libraries. And I think we're now up to 60,000 distinct titles in the system. And another thing that really sold us on Mediaflex was TMD itself, because I think we were, at the time, as an international distribution company, we were probably a new type of client for TMD, in that not only did we have all this content, but we had multiple versions of the content, so different frame rates, different versions. We had a lot of SD content because the library that we had acquired was an old one, and so we have HD up converts in letterbox and some in pillarbox and some pan and scan and all of that stuff. We gave that to the TMD team, and they came up with a solution that enabled us to segregate all of those different versions under a single title. So we can search for something and we can immediately see, okay, we've got a PAL, we've got an NTSC, we've got a 16:9, we've got a 4:3, we've got a Netflix version, we've got a blah, blah, blah. So that was really why we went with TMD. And having said that, it's been, what, 4 years now, Tony, I think?
Yeah,
certainly closing in on 4 years.
Yeah.
I think we have stretched the system far beyond what it was designed to do. And our automated workflows are now creating, for YouTube, for example, an operator can select a single episode, can select all the languages they want from a single drop-down menu, and off it goes and creates 15, 20, 30 different versions of the same file, or the same episode in multiple languages. And the response time from TMD, they don't stop and say, well, why the hell are you doing that? They just say, okay, let's think about this, and then usually within a few hours come back with, okay, here's what you need to do. So it's impossible to state or to overstate the impact that having this system has had on our business. But I would say that the number of, and as Tony was saying, the market for content has just ballooned in the last decade, and certainly in the last 2 years, even with the lockdowns and everything, we've seen much more demand for things. But we are pumping out like thousands of files a day now, and a lot of, I won't say all of it, but a lot of it is thanks to Tony and the team, and Mediaflex.
Thanks for that, Martin. Yeah, I think, yes, it's been a good experience for ourselves. Some challenges along the way on the versioning side of things, but I think any projects like that within the media business. So yeah, it's been a good one, and it's good to hear that the London operation has now had that implemented in the last week, which is great news.
And the feedback has been, very, very positive from everyone involved. Again, they've gone from a very manual process. On YouTube, they're putting up episodes, but they're putting up compilations of episodes, so you can stick your kids in front of the screen for an hour and go do something else. But yeah, we've created the ability to mix up those titles so that they're random, and I say the multiple language thing. That was a head scratcher for a long time, but with you guys' help, we got that working as well. And I think that adoption is going to be slightly challenging because people don't like to change the way they work, but the ones that are diving in are just can't speak highly enough of it. So
that's good, and it is, it's the new channels. We're not really talking here about scheduled TV, etc. As you say, it's
well,
creating.
No, we deliver very many files to our linear channels every
Yeah.
month.
Yeah. So, but YouTube, etc., is another distribution channel, which is great. So, thanks for that, Martin. It's good to hear it's working well. So the next one that I really want to look at is an extremely large operation. What we can see here is the amount of content or the amount of workflow decisions and the amount of automated decisions that are going on within this client, but also the amount of videotapes that they have in their operation. Now, this is an archive that's been around for a few years. And really, as you can see, the volume of content that's flowing through this system is pretty phenomenal. I'd like to bring Olly Henshell in really to really talk a little bit about his experience in from an operational, from a client perspective, in the workflow side of things with Mediaflex, and I'm sure Olly will say to you about the fact that designing workflows yourself and adding to workflows yourself using the graphical tool is part of the benefit of this. So, Olly, if you can just talk a little bit about your experience.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so automation was very important to us. Basically, we tried to automate all parts of the chain in order for media to be available to the playout system or for edit or for VOD in the quickest time possible. So if media arrived in the middle of the night, Mediaflex will match that to the version, extract metadata, move it to another location dependent on that metadata or which version it was attached to, create a proxy, potentially do an assisted QC task, and be ready for an operator to view the file in the morning. So the constant processing reduces any bottlenecks that could slow up operations. So I was involved in a migration from on-premise playout to cloud playout a few years ago, and as part of the migration, Omni and reference files and the media associated with it had to be converted to single MXFs with separate audio. So, and this was all done without any operator involvement, with Mediaflex reading the metadata from the MOV as well as from the database to make decisions on all the different files. So for example, a 5.1 Dolby audio WAV was recognized as such. The decision was put through a decode workflow. Maybe a left and a right mono pair were converted to an interleave track. So while at the same time retaining what language the track was and using that in the file name of the output. So all of this was Mediaflex making decisions on the metadata that was held and reducing errors and mistakes while speeding up processing overall.
So I think from that, Olly, we can glean, you know, one of the areas that I think you were involved in pretty heavily was actually building those workflows yourself and designing those workflows using the graphical tools. And from that, it's really a no-code environment. And was that a major part of how quickly you could actually manage this content and manage the business operations?
Absolutely, because I mean, for the engineers that were supporting it and the operators as well, none of us were coders, and we could immediately diagnose what the problem with the workflow was because it was straight in front of us in readable form. And we could also, once we had the tools, we could build those workflows ourselves as well. So some things needed TMD assistance, but in the general workflows, we could do it all ourselves and without any TMD involvement at all. So
putting yourselves really the business in control of its operations is really
exactly
a big part of that. So
yeah, I would add that is huge for us as well. I mean, just it's so great to have a test system where we can play around and break things and then have you guys fix them and then break them again?
I think that's down to Dan to fix those.
Dan and I mean, we obviously being based in Canada, we probably deal more with the guys out in Texas. So but certainly Dan and Vicky were huge in this this whole deployment of ours. But and I was also going to add that being with your offices across the globe, support is never far away. We get responses in the middle of the night from.
It's trying to do a follow the sun support operation. It has its challenges, but it has its benefits to our clients as well. So that's great.
For sure.
So I think from a use case perspective and a user feedback perspective, I think hearing from Martin has been great, and hearing from Olly, who now works for TMD. He's come from a client, but we've managed to bring him on board, which is great news, because he has that operational expertise within some fairly complex multi-audio, multi-subs operations, and I think there's many audio languages that have been managed through the system. So, in summary, before we go into a Q&A session, I think what we've seen from this is that hyperautomation optimizes the automation and orchestration by utilizing that metadata, by putting it into the tasks, by dynamically changing that as it flows through the workflow. You can really create a flexible architecture that allows you to drive those business processes and make them much more efficient. The metadata repository, the meta server as we call it, is hugely flexible and extensible. You can have virtually any type of metadata in there. You can create your own metadata schemas within it, and allow you to use any of that metadata to drive those workflows as well. So it's not just the base database information or the file information. You can have your own schemas in there that have very specific and unique metadata to your operations. The resources is clearly a part of the system, whether that be the human resources or the technology resources, integrating into lots of third-party systems, all the transcoders, business systems, taking that metadata in from the business systems and driving the processes as well, and out to play out or out to VOD and on-demand platforms. All of the metadata documents that are required for VOD, including the graphics, etc., allows you to take that out, and the resources that are used to do that, and the integration, as I say, of third-party systems. So, from a summary, I think what we've seen is some use cases, some information there to take away and see how business processes can be managed through that content supply chain. Just like to say thank you for all of the participants and the panelists. We're here. You can contact us through the website. As you can see, we have offices in the US, UK, Malaysia, and Australia. But for that, I think we'll wrap that up today.